Another day, another Mortarch. This time, the Mortarch of the Necropolis, the Lord of the Bone Tithe himself, Katakros. Now, Katakros, unlike our previous Mortarch, Lady Olynder, definitely does pay for his presence. He is a whopping 500 points, he is almost double the cost of the Mortarch of Grief, and so you are expecting him to bring a lot to the battlefield. And to his credit, he certainly does that. He has a very weighty war scroll, and as before, we're going to be taking a look through his rules, through the generic Ossiarch Bonereaper rules to get a better idea of just what he can do, and then we are going to try and decide if he is actually any good, and if he is worth that weighty points cost. As an army, the Bonereapers do have some decent battle traits. They don't take battle shock tests like at all, which is brilliant in Age of Sigmar, although rather useless for Katakros himself, of course. They all get a 6-up ward save from Deathless Warriors, which does affect him and is actually a big boost to his durability. Thanks to having 20 wounds to chew through, this will net you on average about 3 or 4 extra wounds worth of durability, so it does definitely add up on him. Netherite weapons is another trait they have that gives them essentially exploding 6s, and whilst Katakros doesn't get this on his really good weapons, he does get it on some of them, so he does have potentially a decent bit of extra chaff clearing potential at least, compared to what it may initially look like from his war scroll. And then they also get some bonus command points depending on how many units you have, and a few extra command abilities to make use of over the course of a game, which does give the army as a whole some significant flexibility, and it gives Katakros himself a few extra abilities and ways to, interact with CP a bit more to help boost his buffing potential. Katakros himself is a member of the Mortis Praetorians Legion, which is one of the Ossiarch Bonereaper's sub-factions, and so with them, he actually can benefit from their ability, which is once per turn during the enemy charge phase. After an enemy unit has charged, you can pick a unit within 12 inches of that enemy unit, and your unit can attempt to charge. So he can play with some tricksy shenanigans to support his units that have been charged, or if you have friendly units nearby and he's been charged, you can potentially send some in to support him. So I think all in all, it's fair to say he does benefit reasonably well from the faction and the sub-faction abilities, and they do help him out quite a lot. Certainly he loves the ward save and the bonus command points, which can be very handy for helping him get around things like his slow movement, or just making him ridiculously durable with something like a 5-up ward rather than the 6-up that you can access. However, despite all of that, he is, as mentioned, still 500 points. So we want more than just being okay with the faction battle traits. We want his own unique war scroll to be fairly beefy as well. And, well, luckily, it kind of is. On the stats front, he has a mighty 20 wounds, which gives him a lot of resilience and chances to get wounds back before the enemy can kill him outright. He is also protected by a 3-up armor save, which is again very strong in Age of Sigmar, and can very easily be bumped up to a 2-up save with all-out defense, or alternatively get him to a 3-up armor save, 5-up ward save instead, with the impenetrable ranks Ossiarch command. So he is undeniably durable. He does, however, suffer in his movement, which is a pitiful 4 inches, so he is very much like a big, solid chunk of rock. He is really tough, really hard to kill, but very slow. So it is possible for your opponent, especially if they are playing well, to just play around Katakros and basically avoid him for most of the game if they don't want to engage him. And so that is a bit of a downside, but the good news is that while Katakros does want to be running up the board as much as possible, his real kind of powers and benefits are that he is a truly incredible army buffer. So even if he isn't in combat, he will still be bringing a lot to the rest of your army, and it is honestly a large part of what makes him so expensive, those force multiplying abilities, rather than his actual combat output itself. So even though he does have a slow move, as long as he is with your army buffing it up and just making it better, you are still getting a good amount of value from him. Now, that's not to say his combat output is bad. He can do a decent bit of damage, although it does weirdly get better as he gets more damaged, which is to represent the support models on his base dying and him actually having to step up and fight himself rather than delegating it to his lessers. So in combat at full health, he has 10 attacks with his retinue blades. These are the ones that benefit from the exploding 6s of Nadrite weapons, and they have a profile of 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. So he does already have some reasonably decent chaff clearing potential with that. But then he also swings in that bracket once with his shield Immortis and with the blade Indicart. Now Indicart again hits and wounds on 3s, but is -3 rend and a flat 3 damage, whilst the shield again hits on 3s and wounds on 3s and is -2 rend and 2 damage. So both of those are in themselves really great attacks, there just isn't very many of them. However, as he gets more and more damaged, or crucially when he fights an enemy leader, thanks to his do nothing, this one is mine rule, this changes so that he gets less retinue blade attacks down to 7 in the bottom bracket, but bumping his sword and his shield to 4 attacks each. So that is potentially 20 damage from him alone without counting the retinue blades. So he can get very, very scary indeed, and enemy leaders and heroes will definitely want to stay away from him to avoid proccing this rule and just letting you slam a load of high rend, high damage attacks into your opponent's important units. So durability, great. Damage output, not amazing, but certainly he can do some decent damage into the enemy. But again, that doesn't quite make him worth 500 points. No, we still need more. And that is where his massive war scroll of rules and abilities comes into the story. So first up, Katakros has the War Master rule, so he will always get treated as your general even if he isn't picked as it, which is really useful for some interactions and abilities and is just generally a really handy little quality of life rule to have, so that is very, very welcome. And then Companion is the rule that gives all of his attendant blades the Nadrite rule, meaning their 10 attacks can potentially end up with 20 hits if you roll perfectly. Again, that's not very likely, but it does add some more chaff clearing potential to his profile. After that, the individual models on his base also each bring their own buff to the War Scroll, and unlike his previous incarnation, what's really good is that these don't go away the more that Katakros gets damaged. They are just there all the time now, so that is a very, very welcome improvement. The Prime Necropolis, the dude with the banner, he grants Katakros the ability to issue a command to a unit once per turn anywhere on the battlefield for free. So no CP needed, and that means that even in a far-flung combat, you can get off that vital all-out defense or all-out attack as you need it, and even if you are completely out of command points, you can still rely on getting that little defensive or offensive bonus. It's just an extra way that the Bonereapers really do amazingly well in terms of command point economy. You not only get extra thanks to your battle traits, but you also have some to go out for free, and that really will make a significant difference over the course of an entire game. Because this is once per turn, it means you can potentially get 10 additional commands thrown out for no cost over the course of a full game. Next up, we have his Gnosis Scrollbearer, and that grants him the very useful far-reaching debuff onto an enemy. It goes off in your hero phase, and you pick an enemy unit again anywhere on the battlefield, and until your next hero phase, they are just a flat -1 to hit. This isn't just in melee, it seems to be everything, so this can be really great for messing up enemy archers if you want, or if you have a big scary enemy Death Star staring down your lines. This will, at the very least, make them be forced to spend a CP on all-out attack just to try and get as many hits onto your units as possible, and if they don't have the CP for that, this will of course massively reduce the amount of damage your army will be taking. The fact that this is anywhere, any unit, makes it so unbelievably strong, and you really can keep a flank alive and well even if Katakros is all the way on the other end of the table. It's very, very useful to have, and it is a significant debuff for an enemy unit to have. He's also got an Aviarch Spymaster to help you even more with the command point economy, although in a debuffing sense this time. This rule lets you roll whenever your opponent gets a command point, and on a 5+, it's just lost. So if they were relying on that new battle round command point, or they had an ability or rule or whatever that generated one, you could just flat out deny it. Now of course a 5+ isn't super reliable, but in Age of Sigmar, when command points are such a rare and valuable resource, even just denying 1 or 2 over the course of a game can actually massively impact an enemy's battle plans, and could mean, as a quick example, in concert with the above ability, they simply have to accept that -1 to hit. They can't even try to get around it with something like all-out attack, just because they won't have the command points to do it. So these two abilities alone are a hugely strong combo, and they really will make your opponent feel the squeeze when trying to get the most out of their command abilities, whilst watching you drowning in them by having more from the get-go, as well as having those free 0 CP abilities that Katakros can do as well. However, it doesn't quite end there. Whilst all of the above is of course very, very good, the best is yet to come. He's got a rule much like the other big death characters and Mortarchs. Mortarch of the Necropolis is his healing spell. In your healing phase, you can choose up to 3 Bonereaper units within 24 inches, and you can heal up to 3 wounds, or return 3 slain models to the unit, with the small caveat that on things like Immortus Guard or Stalkers, you can only return 3 wounds to one of their models, or if there is a slain model, you roll a dice and on a 3+ you can return a model with 4 wounds remaining. And that is just a really strong ability. It means you can potentially be bringing back 9 Mortarch Guard if you have 3 separate units of them, or put some heals onto your leaders, your Morghast units, but also crucially, Katakros can use this on himself. So those 20 wounds with his 3+ save and 6+ ward are now going to be even harder to chew through, because he can just bring himself back if you don't manage to do enough damage before he gets to do this ability. It does make him a huge force multiplier in being able to heal up all of your units, but also it is a really strong ability for keeping himself alive for a bit longer too. And then finally, to round out his massive war scroll, he also has 2 incredibly strong command abilities. The first is Endless Duty. You do this in your hero phase, selecting a friendly Bonereaper's unit, and until your next hero phase, they get +1 attack. This is of course incredibly strong, giving you a huge amount of extra damage to anything from your Necropolis Stalkers to 20 strong blobs of Mortarch Guard. It is very much a top tier command ability all on its own. However, the next and final ability is probably where you'll be spending most of his free command ability rule, and I would say arguably where most of Katakros' cost actually comes in. Supreme Lord of the Bonereaper Legions is just, I would say without a doubt, one of the best command abilities in the entire game. The fact that you can use this for free with his Prime Necropolis rule just makes it mind-blowingly good. It has actually been toned down from its previous incarnation where it had a 36-inch range, but it is still just one of the best force multiplication abilities in all of Age of Sigmar. So essentially, as long as Katakros is more than 3 inches from enemy units, you can do this command ability, and you do it in your hero phase, and until your next hero phase, all Bonereaper units wholly within 24 inches not only get +1 to their hit rolls, but on top of that, they also get +1 to their saving throws. Now, despite being reduced, 24 inches is still a huge aura. It basically covers most of the board, and that essentially means that you can get a de facto all-out attack and all-out defense pretty much army-wide for either 1 CP or potentially for free if you use his free CP ability. It really is so strong, and it will make your small elite army go from being reasonably durable and hard-hitting to just overwhelmingly so. It's also one of the reasons why Katakros' slow movement isn't actually all that awful, because you really want him moving up in the middle of your forces, just marshalling your troops like a proper general, and being able to give out this buff for, a few turns really to beef up your forces and just smash into the enemy and survive. And then in the later game, he can wade in and start to take out enemy leaders and units himself. It's also worth noting that he only needs to be outside of 3 inches from enemies in your hero phase when you use this. If you then go in and charge, it still applies. As long as you are outside of 3 inches when you activate this, it goes off. And it means that the only kind of downside is that you can get this off and then charge in. But then if you don't manage to kill the enemy before your next hero phase, you won't be able to get this off again because you will then be in 3 inches of an enemy. It's just ridiculously good, this ability. It makes what is already a fairly potent force multiplier arguably just rockets to being the best one in the game. It really is that good. But is he still worth 500 points? Despite all that, is he worth 500 points? And that's the tricky question, because he is undeniably good in many, many ways. He is very durable, he can potentially do a decent bit of damage, and he has got some insanely good buffing potential. He can boost your entire army's hit rolls and saves, he can give you some free command points as well as denying the enemy some, and of course he has that constant healing to various units all game long, so he does have a massive amount of utility. And I think it's fair to say you don't see all that many Bonereaper lists that don't have him in, because even at 500 points, he is just very, very strong and very, very worthwhile in terms of what he brings to an Ossiarch army. But he does have his downsides. He is very, very slow, he's only got that 4-inch move, and it is easy to play around him and make it so that whilst he is, yes, still buffing and debuffing stuff, he's never able to reach combat effectively, which is still wasting some of his value. And on top of that, even when he is in melee, whilst it's not terrible and in perfect conditions, he can do some scary damage, it's not all that amazing. If your opponent just keeps feeding him regular units and no leaders, until he hits that low bracket, he really doesn't do amazingly well in terms of his damage output. I would say his attacks are solid, but not quite 500 points worth of solid until he goes into an enemy hero. And then on top of that, he is also not a wizard. He's got no spellcasting, no unbinding, and those two things are very big things in Age of Sigmar. And when you have, especially in an army like the Bonereapers, someone like Archon the Black that you could take, yes, he's not quite as good at buffing overall, but he still can do the brilliant healing the same as Katakros. He's got much better movement, and he can cast and unbind 3 spells, so he does bring a lot of utility himself, albeit in a different way. But then on top of that, Archon the Black is also over 100 points cheaper than Katakros. So there are some big pros, there are some fairly significant cons, but overall, is Katakros worth it and is he good? I'm going to side with yes. He is very strong and he can absolutely be game changing in your army. You just have to be sure you build around him. He is 100% going to be the key linchpin in your list if you are bringing him. Build around him, keep him safe, get him able to buff as many of your units and as much of your army as possible until you need him in combat, and then you will just find yourself with a supremely durable, elite army that can tank a huge amount of damage, heal back up, and then just hit back equally as hard into your opponent. So that is Katakros. I personally love him, I love the model, I think he's great. He's not my favourite Mortarch by any stretch, but I think he is definitely a very worthwhile one to bring. But as always, I'd love to know what you think. Do you like him, and do you find yourself bringing him in your Bonereaper lists often, or is someone like Archon just a better pick? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.